Welcome to Innovation in Government. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is John Davis, the Vice President of Public Sector for Palo Alto Networks. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion. For the last year or so, Zero Trust has been one of those buzzwords. Every CIO, every CISO, every vendor talked about this new approach to cybersecurity, how over time shifting to a Zero Trust architecture would provide agencies with a more rigorous approach to network, system, and data security. But like any security tool or concept before, Zero Trust is not a panacea to all the federal government's cybersecurity challenges. What Zero Trust is, according to Forrester, is a set of robust detection and incident response capabilities to protect your vital digital assets. The industry government group ACT-IAC released a white paper in 2019 on Zero Trust and offered a more focused view of this concept. In it, the public-private working group recognized what Zero Trust is a security concept anchored on the principle that organizations need to proactively control all interactions between people, data, and information systems to reduce security risks to acceptable levels. They also highlighted an important aspect of this approach. The current set of tools many agencies are using can play a big role in this Zero Trust architecture. So, how can agencies move down this path toward creating a Zero Trust environment? What are the potholes to avoid and concepts they need to be front of mind? Well, that's where my guest comes in. My guest once again is John Davis, the Vice President of Public Sector for Palo Alto Networks. John, let me start with this concept of Zero Trust. It gets thrown around a lot. I made a little poked a little fun at it because it's all the buzzword, the latest buzzword. But describe what you consider Zero Trust is.
Sure thing, Jason. I guess we could start with the motto. A lot of people know the motto for Zero Trust. It's trust nothing, verify everything.
I thought that was a Reagan thing.
I think it's pretty evergreen.
Evergreen, there you go.
But it just so happens, you mentioned Forrester. Well, the person who was the founder of this concept, John Kindervag, when he was at Forrester, has joined my company, Palo Alto Networks, as the field chief technology officer. So I've had a chance to spend a lot of time talking to the master about this concept. So for me, there are a couple of key concepts here for Zero Trust. The first one is it's a change in approach. What we used to do is start at the perimeter and try to keep bad things out and assume that everything that was inside that perimeter was good. That's no longer valid. And the Zero Trust approach is about going from the inside out and protecting things at the lowest possible level that you can draw a perimeter. And the second big concept is that means if you take an inside out approach, then you got to figure out what is it that's most important to my business or my mission to protect. In the military, I spent 35 years in the military. For us in the cyber domain, that was called cyber key terrain. In other words, it was a mapping of the most important networks, systems, data, and even people that each organization relied on to do its most important mission or function. In Zero Trust, John Kindervag talks about a protect surface. It's the same concept. It's that shrinking things down to what is most important to protect in an organization, and then making sure that you're able to have fine granular controls, visibility, and protections around that protect surface. So if I had to wrap this all into a saying, to me, Zero Trust is really about ensuring that only authorized users are allowed to do authorized functions using authorized applications with authorized content from authorized devices. And anything else is not allowed unless you make an exception for it.
I heard a theme toward the end there, the key word there, authorized.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the biggest concept of Zero Trust is what are you allowed to see, what are you allowed to do, and then what are you allowed to do with it? So, for example, can John Davis read this document? Yes, he can. Can he write it? Can he make changes? No, he can't. So it goes back to that roles and responsibilities, which is a huge, what we've been talking about for, I felt like the last 15 or 20 years is that next level. So we're getting there. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Slowly.
It's a journey. It is a journey.
One of the things that you bring up is cyber key terrain. I think it's a great concept that I think the civilian agencies, because you mentioned that's a very DoD folk kind of approach. In the civilian world, they've changed it to the high value assets and kind of that's inside out perspective. When you talk to agencies, when you work with your agency customers, are they starting to take that approach? Or are they still in that in-between stage of the perimeter, the high wall, the moat, and then they're starting to look at the high value assets? Where are we in the journey?
I think it depends. I think that it's uneven across both industry and across government. Some organizations are better at it than others. And I believe that those who are better at it than others do understand the need to start there. Start with what's most important, because you can't protect everything from everything. It's in the military terminology that makes you weak everywhere. So if you really want to be strong where it counts, you got to figure out where it matters most. And that's either cyber key terrain as a concept, protected surface, high value assets. There are many different terms to explain the same dynamic. And the companies that are, and government organizations that are really good at that spend a tremendous amount of time on that first step before they then come up with an architecture and a strategy to build an architecture to secure those things.
Very similar to this idea that if you don't know what you're protecting, then you can't protect anything. You just end up protecting nothing. So walk me through why Zero Trust now? Why are we at the point where we're talking about it and doing it?
Okay, in other words, why is it so important?
Well, sure, you can say it that way.
Okay, this is the way I look at it. If you look at the marketplace of technology, and the dynamics that have been happening now for the past 10, 15 years. Everything is moving in a direction that is bringing more and more opportunity, more and more benefits, especially in social and economic arenas. But at the same time, with that growth, at the same time, there's always a dark side to the coin, and that's risks and threats and dangers that are associated with this rapid growth. What makes that even more dramatic is if you look at this phenomenon called the Internet of Things, where we're connecting everything to this IT environment, and you look at the growth of 5G technologies. So now you're talking not just scale with Internet of Things, but speed with being able to connect to these things. What that means is that the attack surface, the opportunity for threats to take advantage of vulnerabilities in that attack surface is growing exponentially. But that's not the only problem. There's an even worse problem associated with this, and that is not just scale, but impact or consequence. Because now you're talking about, we know that there are adversaries, nation-state adversaries that are targeting both government and industry, what's important to government and industry, and we know they're targeting critical infrastructure. And so, and not just nation-state adversaries, but this whole panoply of loosely controlled third-party actors, like surrogates and front companies and criminal organizations and even patriotic hackers that are kind of, they're taking a hint in some cases from governments that may not be friendly towards us. And in other cases, they're getting absolute direction, but their skills and their motivations are questionable. So you've got this whole array of threats that now have access to not just, as bad as it was to have your data encrypted for ransom or your personal information taken and exposed on the dark web, or your secrets taken for espionage purposes. As bad as that was, now you're putting mass transit systems at risk. You're putting potentially life-sustaining devices at risk. So for me, the thing that I worry about, and as someone who's been in the national security community, the military for 35 years, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that the path we're on could put people's lives at risk if we don't bake in security as we look to this technology. And so I think we're at a critical point now where we need to absolutely do that.
The other piece that I thought you were going to go on this path was when you talk about the impact, you talk about the nation states, you talk about the criminal organizations, they have access to a much deeper, much more powerful set of tools that they can attack. And then as the attack surface gets bigger, they have more areas to go in. The old saying of attackers just have to find one way in, but the defenders have to defend everything. I think that's the other reason why Zero Trust has become much more popular and much more, we have to go down there because we just can't keep up with the scale and the impact.
And more bad news.
More bad news, great.
More bad news. The attackers have traditionally had an advantage over defenders, And if you look at what's happening in the threat landscape now, more use of automation, more use of file sharing and tool sharing. And it's becoming easier for attackers to do what they want to, whatever their intended purpose is, at greater speed and at greater scale. So the good news, the counter to that, is a zero trust approach, where you provide the opportunity to see and stop a threat before it's successful, or at least that's best case. Worst case, limit the damage that could result from a successful attack.
I think that's the key, that what I've heard about zero trust and why people are excited about it, is the limiting of the damage. Okay, I lost this server, but I'm not losing my whole system, or the whole network is not going to come down. It's just a piece of it. And I do think that the automation, the fact that there's so much sharing going on, has obviously both good and bad news. Automation also can help with the cybersecurity, which we may get to later in the program. This idea of whether it's AI or machine learning, or just the fact is that you can run certain scripts to get through it. Where does industry fit into this? I mean, beyond providing tools, industry is bringing resources, bringing knowledge, but what are they doing to kind of help agencies move down the path of zero trust?
You're talking the federal government agencies?
Yeah.
Well, two things come to mind. One is information sharing, threat intelligence sharing, which has, I won't say it's perfect, but has been made easier by recent, 2015 legislation.
Feels recent, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And there's a lot going on in the threat information sharing space, both government to industry, industry to government, and across industry. The second area is a lot of innovation happening in the cybersecurity industry right now, across the industry. I recently testified, I guess it was a year ago, testified before the cybersecurity subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and that was the question: is what is it that DoD should be leveraging from industry? And then we had a panel, and I was one of 4 representatives. And my response was that use of automation and software-based advanced analytics like machine learning, big data, deep learning, behavior analytics, and even AI when we fully mature that. The threat is using those already. Industry has learned how to use those in the defense, and that I believe government agencies, that's where industry can really help government agencies, are in those 2 areas of automation, because you've got to fight machines with machines. You've got to fight software with software instead of fighting it with people, because we'll never have enough people to solve this problem using people alone in a very response-oriented methodology.
It's interesting you bring up the behavior analytics. I think that is where, in many ways, where zero trust is helping agencies get to. I was on a panel just recently with the SBA Chief Technology Officer, and he said one of the cyber tools that they are using is this idea that if John Davis logs in Washington, D.C. at 8 a.m., and then logs in, his credentials are used to log in again in California at 9 a.m., there's a problem. That's a red flag, because there's no way you can get in an hour from DC to California. And it's that type of thing that zero trust can come in and be like, hold on, problem, red flag, block, stop what's going on. And I think that's the promise, that behavior side.
Trust nothing, verify everything. And that's a tool to verify that is an authorized user doing authorized things.
John, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network.